Good morning, everybody. How are you all doing today? It's going to be another quick one today, I'm afraid, because in my quest to pet a baby goat, we are heading out somewhere else today. It's technically the school holidays here, so we're heading out to a place today where I'm reasonably confident they will have some baby goats. So I will let you know how successful that is. As you might remember, I tried to go and pet some baby goats last time, and there weren't any there, and I was just devastated is the word. So the place we're going to today should have some, and I might try and smuggle one home inside my t-shirt and can come and live here in my office. It'd be so cool. Anyway, we're in execution. Alex and Z and Simon and Lucy are still on the run from Colonel Annis Panettiere and her army. They caught up to them just as they were leaving Alex's house. And unfortunately, the black suit, who just remembered that his name was Sam, got assassinated by one of Panettiere's snipers. And Alex and Z and Simon and Lucy had just floored their truck through the wall of a shop and managed to escape all the tanks and helicopters and everything. And are now heading towards the island where they know that Furness is. Alex has got this idea in his head that he knows he wants to kill Alfred Furness, but he also knows that Panettiere isn't going to stop chasing him. And if he can get to the island, then there are a lot of monsters on the island who he can technically control. And he's just called them his army. So he's kind of, he's kind of wavering towards the dark side a little bit. Or is he? Maybe that's the light side. This is who knows? Anyway, go for a couple of chapters. The next one is called Dead Air. I have to tie my hair back these days because it's just crazy otherwise. Okay. Dead Air. The highway seemed to go on forever, an endless scar that stretched from the city out across the land beyond. After 10 minutes, the office blocks began to grow smaller, from 30 stories to 20 to 10, until the buildings we passed were barely taller than houses. We drove through the southern boroughs without seeing a single sign of life, as if something had reached down and scooped up every man, woman and child in the entire area. We didn't see many corpses either, although we could smell them, the air heavy with the stench of the dead. The truck reeked too, the inside slick with nectar, and after 20 minutes Z pulled us off the highway into a service station. I can't take this anymore, he said, gagging. I think I'm sitting on that black suit's brains. He popped open the door, stepping out and taking a deep, shuddering breath. Hold up, I called after him. We don't know it's safe. I clambered out of the truck, scanning the neighbourhood for rats. There were hundreds of blood-coloured footprints across the forecourt, like some kind of morbid dance step routine. Tattered scraps of clothing, seeming to waltz this way and that, pulled by the playful breeze. It gave me the creeps, but I couldn't see any sign of danger. Just be quick, okay? Z waved my comment away, running towards a small group of cars parked next to the shop. I saw him peering inside each one, looking for keys. I'm going to go and see if they've got clothes in there, Lucy said, as she hopped down from the back seat, running in the same direction as Z. Simon stepped out after her, stretching his legs and his back and looking up into the sky. They're still following us, he said, his silver eyes squinting. I can hear them. I could too, that same endless pulse of the helicopters. I lifted my left arm, trying to extend my new middle finger, but the stubby digit didn't seem to want to rise. Simon saw what I was trying to do, lifting both middle fingers to the heavens and waving them up and down. I wondered if the chopper pilots were observing us, if they could see us from so far away. I saw the look of delight on Simon's face as he did a little dance, his fingers held high, and I hoped Panettiere was watching. How far behind do you think they are? I asked, when he'd calmed down. Not far, he said. I reckon they could easily have caught up with us by now. Helicopters aren't exactly slow. I think they might be holding back, seeing where we're going. They could pick Z up any time, but I guess they're hoping you'll lead them to Furness. I was thinking the same thing. In fact, I was counting on it. You want food or anything? I asked him, because now's your chance. Yes, sir, he said, saluting, and then he was legging it towards the shop. I walked over to Z. He'd managed to prise open the door of a friendly-looking van and was fiddling with some wires he'd pulled out of the steering column. How long? I asked. He grunted. 5 minutes, max, he said. Then another couple to nab some fuel. I nodded, leaving him to it and walking into the shop. The door was open, but the place was deserted. It was much bigger than it looked from the outside. Simon was filling a carrier bag with sweets and bottles of Coke, and I could see Lucy further in, browsing the small clothing section. I joined her, wondering if they'd had anything that was anywhere near big enough for me. I was still wearing the surgical gown from the hospital, and it was drenched in blood, nectar, and sweat. Ugh. "This might fit," she said, reading my mind and holding up a green rain poncho. I took it from her. It wasn't exactly the height of fashion, but it had to be better than what I had on now. She squatted down, rummaging in a pile of colourful trousers, eventually pulling out a pair that looked as if they would be tight on an elephant. "Oh, thank God for the obesity epidemic," she went on, grinning. "These should fit you just fine." "Gee, thanks," I said. "I'm about to go and face the leader of an army of monsters that have torn the country, maybe the world apart, and you want me to wear bright orange leggings and a lime green poncho?" Come on. Sorry. Lucy shrugged, grabbing her own clothes and heading towards the toilets. "Could be worse. You might have had to face him wearing a dress." Her laughter echoed after her, contagious, and I was chuckling as I carried my own bundle back towards Simon. He was stuffing his face full of jelly babies, watching Z through the window. I didn't really want to ask him for help, but what choice did I have? My new hands just weren't designed for putting on clothes. I threw the pile onto a shelf by my side, then used the blade of my arm to slice open my gown, shaking the pieces to the floor and coughing gently. Said Simon through a mouthful of sugar when he saw me standing there. "Is there something you're not telling me?" The words brought back another memory. Me and Donovan standing in the chipping room back in Furnace Penitentiary, dressed only in our pants, using our overalls to smuggle the gas-filled gloves across the cave. The thought made me smile, which was probably the wrong thing to do as my expression seemed to make Simon even more nervous. "Quick," I said, glancing back towards the toilets. "I don't want Lucy to come back out and see me butt naked." "Yeah," said Simon, putting his bag of sweets to one side. "I didn't really want to see you butt naked either." He helped me put on the leggings first, trying not to look at the scars and wounds that crisscrossed my body like patchwork. I didn't want to see them either, but it was impossible to turn away. In places, especially my stomach and chest where I received the worst injuries, my skin had hardened like Kevlar. In others, black veins pulsed visibly as the nectar pumped through them, the stretched flesh so taut that it looked as though it might split at any moment, spilling my innards out onto the shop floor. My limbs, too, were unrecognisable, my legs like tree trunks. But I was relieved to see that everything else downstairs remained just the way it should be. Simon, so rude. Simon was obviously noticing the same thing, commenting on it as he pulled the leggings up over my waist. "You'd think the nectar would have given you a bigger," was as far as he got before the toilet door opened and Lucy stepped out. She was wearing a black tracksuit and brand new sneakers, and when she saw us standing there, she covered her eyes. "A little warning would have been nice," she said, quick-stepping across the shop and out the door. We laughed, Simon pulling the poncho off the shelf and getting me to bend down as he slotted it over my head. He had to make a couple of holes in the fabric so I could put my arms through, but other than that, it fit perfectly. "How do I look?" I asked, wiggling my toes and wishing I could find some shoes as well. But at least I was in fresh clothes that didn't reek of other people's blood. Be thankful for small mercies, as my gran had always said. "You look like a carrot that's having a bad hair day," Simon commented. "Thanks," I replied, leading the way back out of the shop. "Or a leprechaun on growth hormones. Okay, I get it, enough." Whose clothes were designed by a muppet and sewn together by a blind monkey. I shot him a look, and he lifted his arms in surrender, grinning like a lunatic. Outside, Z had managed to get the car started and was siphoning fuel from the van parked next to it. Lucy was sitting... Can't get the pages to turn today. In the passenger seat, playing with the radio. They both smirked when they saw my new outfit, but neither of them said anything. I climbed into the back, trying to get my arm inside without killing anybody. Eventually I had to lay it across my lap, the blade taking up the entire seat. Luckily there was another row behind me, and Simon eased himself into it. Static filled the car. "There's nothing on the radio," said Lucy. "Not even an emergency broadcast or anything. Just dead air. Everywhere." We sat there and listened, the white noise like the whisper of a million dead. Every now and then I thought I made out a word in the relentless hiss, but it was always swallowed up before it could make any sense. It seemed to be growing louder, though, as if the dead knew we were listening, like they wanted to shiver through our radio back into the real world. I was glad when Lucy finally switched it off. There was a series of clanks from outside as Z poured the stolen fuel into the car. Then he was in the driver's seat, telling us all to buckle up. "Stay on the highway?" he asked. "Yeah, stay on the highway," I replied. But it wouldn't be for much longer. I could feel that hook inside the flesh of my thoughts, the pain more intense now. And I knew it was because we were closer. Another hour, maybe 2 or 3, and we'd be there. We drove in silence for a while. The landscape outside the car seemed to demand it. I thought once we were out of the city the smoke would begin to clear, but it hung like a filthy blanket over the whole world. There weren't many towns and villages along the way, but even so there were countless reminders of the apocalypse. Literally thousands of cars lay abandoned on the tarmac, some smoking, others with luggage and bodies spilling out of them. A few had messages painted on the windshields or roofs, all saying roughly the same thing: still alive. Help us. But although we slowed down every time we saw one, those messages all turned out to be wrong. There was nobody left breathing. At one point we passed a sign for the War Museum, another place I remembered loving when I was a kid. I remembered the tanks and the planes, the weapons displays inside, the guns and the bazookas and the grenades. We all looked at each other, thinking the same thing but knowing the same truth. Weapons, no matter how many we had and how big they were, wouldn't help us. Not where we were going. About half an hour later I felt the needles in my brain move, the headache sliding from the front of my skull to the left-hand side. "Time to get off the highway," I said. "Take the next exit, will you? We're getting closer." Z followed my directions, speeding down the next exit ramp, following the signs for the port. We passed through half a dozen more villages, all deserted. "I don't understand," said Lucy. "They can't have killed everyone. How's that possible?" Nobody answered, even though we all knew. The nectar. It had torn through these communities like the plague. I tried to imagine what it had been like for the people here, seeing the monsters, the berserkers outside on the street, watching them attack, turning the kids into bloodthirsty, feral beasts. I'd seen friends morphed into mindless killers by Furnace's poison, but I couldn't imagine what it would be like to be set upon by your own children. The horror of attempting to comfort your kids, even as they tried to kill you, and that impossible choice. Do you let them devour you, or do you kill them first? It was unthinkable. The worst thing we saw, by far, was when we drove past a school. We could see movement through the gates, Z slowing down for a closer look. "There are kids in there," he said. "You see them?" I saw them. They weren't kids. They were all wearing uniforms, but their faces were twisted into grimaces, their mouths ringed with blood, their eyes gaping black pits. There were too many to count, all of them throwing themselves at the locked gates, stretching torn fingers out towards our car. A few tried to scrabble up the enormous fences, but they just didn't have the strength, dropping down onto their backs and squirming in the wet earth. They looked weak, ferocious, yes, but half-starved. I remembered what Sam had said, that the nectar kept the rats alive for only so long. That was another small mercy, I guess, that those rats, those children, wouldn't have to suffer their nightmare for much longer. "What do we do with them?" Lucy asked from the passenger seat. "What can we do?" Simon replied. "Let them out?" I looked at their faces, saw the children there beneath the masks of nectar. It seemed like that would be the kindest thing to do, the humane thing. At least then they wouldn't die like animals in a cage. But it would be too dangerous. The moment that chain around the gates was broken, they'd be upon us, not caring that we were their liberators. They only wanted to spread the nectar, spread their disease, and they'd overwhelm us in seconds. "If we leave them there, then she will get them," spat Lucy. "That woman, she'll put them all under the knife, the poor things." "Come on," I said. "The sooner we get to Furnace, the sooner we can make the world normal again." There was no conviction in my voice, though. It didn't matter what happened when we got to the island. There would be no saving these kids or the millions who'd already been slaughtered. Things would never be normal again. We drove off, Lucy's hand pressed against the glass so hard that her knuckles were white, her sobs concealing the dead and the dying behind a veil of condensation. 3 more towns, another 58 miles on the clock, and then the sea pulled itself up over the rooftops. The effect was so dramatic that at first I thought it really was rising, that slate-coloured ocean ready to churn across the land, wipe all this madness from sight. I would have welcomed it, even if it meant being dragged to the depths along with everything else. Z followed the main road to the harbour. There were hardly any boats here, and I saw that as a good sign. It meant that some people might have escaped. The compass of pain in my head had shifted again, and I told Z to head down the coast. He did so, all of us gazing at the ocean, all of us thinking the same thing, that we could just go, that we'd be safer on the other side of that horizon. But none of us said it out loud. 15 minutes outside the harbour, the pain detonated, the sensation like a stun grenade going off inside my head. I screwed my eyes shut, seeing the island emerge out of the infinite brightness of my mind. "Stop the car!" I yelled, when I could remember how to speak. I blinked the spot of light from my vision as Z pulled over to the side of the road. "I think this is it." "No kidding," Simon replied, peering between the seats. I followed his gaze to see 2 black suits sitting on a bench by the cliff like a couple of tourists. They stood up when they saw us approach, their silver eyes brighter than the shrouded sun. One of them carried something in his right hand. "I don't see any island," said Z. Through the side window I could make out nothing except water, but there was no denying it. There was no escaping the fact that we'd arrived, because I could hear Furness's laughter in my head, louder than the idling engine, louder than the explosion of the waves as they struck the cliff below, louder than the pounding of my heart. We were here. The island. By the time Z had switched off the engine, the black suits were striding towards us. They were both wearing red armbands, the Furness logo, 3 circles joined by a triangle of lines, emblazoned on them like a swastika. Neither of them looked armed. I opened the door, struggling out and extending myself to my full height. I was so much taller than the suits now. I thought back to the night I'd first met them, inside the house where Toby was shot, how they'd seemed like giants. Funny how your perspective can change. I let my bladed hand drop to my side, the black obsidian skin seeming to reflect the clouds overhead. Both the black suits hesitated when they saw how big I was, their pace slowing. "Alex Sawyer," said one, and compared to the echo of Furness's laughter, his voice was little more than a whisper. Unlike the other suits, these 2 didn't look at me with scorn and disrespect. If anything, their faces were shaped by awe. "It's good to meet you at last, sir. This is for you." He held out the bundle he was carrying, letting it unfurl from his scarred fist. It was a suit, a black one, and it had obviously been made specially for me because it looked like it was big enough for a polar bear. "No way," I spat as everyone else clambered out of the car behind me. "You seriously want me to wear that? No way." "You won't get to see him without it," the black suit said. "You may be his new general, but even you've got to follow his rules." I thought about arguing some more, then decided it would be pointless. It was just a suit, after all. It didn't have to mean anything. Besides, it had to be better than what I was already wearing. I didn't really want to face Furness in orange leggings and a lime green poncho. I grabbed it, carrying it to the far side of the car, beckoning Simon for help. "Again?" he asked incredulously, but he trotted over. It took us a few minutes, but together we managed to get me dressed. All the while, gulls swooped overhead, their cries reminding me of the river back in the city, that tide of corpses. "There," I said to the black suits, feeling their eyes on me, approving. The suit did feel good, despite the fact it was a gift from the man I was about to kill. It was soft against my skin, the material cut to exactly the right size for my new body, although I had no idea how they'd managed to make it. The blade of my right hand jutted out, the same shade of black as the cloth. "Happy? Now take me to Furness." "That's why we're here," said the other one. "You ready?" "No," I said, but the word didn't make it out of my head. The black suits weren't waiting for an answer anyway. They turned and walked across a small swathe of grass towards the edge of a cliff. There was a railing there, and what looked like a cast-iron staircase leading down. "My friends are coming too," I said. The black suits shrugged. "Their funeral." I looked at Z, then at Simon, and finally at Lucy. "You guys don't have to do this," I said. "I don't know what's out there. I don't know what will happen. Once we're on that island, the chances of any of us getting off it again are pretty slim." "Don't you mean non-existent?" Simon said. 1,000,000,000 to 1, added Z. "So about the same odds as of us surviving if you leave us on this cliff," said Lucy. I nodded, looking around. On the other side of the road was a gift shop and a fish and chip restaurant, and further down was a pub. It looked quiet here, but there was no guarantee it would stay that way. It could have been any seaside town across the country, and the thought reminded me of the day at the beach I'd spent with my mum and dad, the one in the photo they'd left for me. I wondered if they were watching me now, wherever they were. "Yeah, about the same," I said after a moment, turning back to them. The black suits were waiting by the stairs, showing no sign that they wanted us to hurry up. "Besides, you can't really be expected to take on Furness without the big guns," said Z, flexing those stick-like arms of his. I snorted out a laugh, another one. I don't know why, but I must have laughed more in the last 24 hours than I had in years. I guess if you lose your sense of humour, then you might as well hand yourself over to the Grim Reaper and be done with it. And the bigger the nightmare, the louder the laughs needed to be to keep yourselves alive. "Well, what are we waiting for?" said Simon. "Group hug?" I waved the suggestion away with a smile, walking towards the black suits. They stood to either side of the narrow staircase, letting me past. As soon as I reached the edge of the cliff, the sheer drop beyond made my stomach churn and my head spin. Although further out, the sea looked calm. Below me it thrashed and tore against the rock with a ferocity that reminded me of the rats. Each wave detonated with the sound of a bomb going off, a shrapnel of surf reaching 20 metres into the air, beads of salt water purling on my new suit. The staircase cut diagonally down the cliff face, bolted into the rock, looking too much like the staircases back in the prison for my liking. I could see that it led to a small bay. There was a boat there, rocking in the tide. I looked at the black suits, thought of the pain they'd put me through the night they'd shot Toby, and how they'd treated us back inside Furness Penitentiary. I didn't hate them, though. They'd been turned, like me. They were victims, too. I'd meant what I'd said to Z back at the hospital. I wasn't on the same side as Furness's soldiers, but we weren't enemies anymore, either. "One of you saved us," I told them, as I walked onto the first step, the metal creaking. I held onto the railing with my good hand, the chipped iron cold to the touch. "Back at the hospital. His name was Sam. Do you know him?" "If he had a name, then he wasn't one of us anymore," replied the suit. I set off down the steps, taking it slowly, knowing that one slip could send me over the edge. And I wouldn't be the first, I realised. The areas of beach that the sea hadn't covered were littered with corpses, people who couldn't handle the horror, people who'd taken the easy way out. They hung over the shingle like seaweed. I tried to ignore them, focusing on my own feet as I descended towards the beach. "So, where is the island?" I heard Z asking behind me, the wind tugging at his words. "About 5 miles out," one of the black suits replied. "It won't take long." I stepped onto the stony beach, walking over to the small motorboat that was bobbing up and down in the surf. A third black suit was sitting inside it, and he frowned when he saw us all approach. "Gonna be a squeeze," he said. I waded into the freezing water, the waves here smaller but no less aggressive, pulling on my ankles, trying to drag me out to sea. It was up to my ears. It wasn't. I was up to my knees by the time I reached the boat, the black suit grabbing my left hand and helping me on board. It rocked alarmingly, and I sat down on the small seat at the bow, 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 before I could fall back out. Welcome aboard, sir," said the pilot, adjusting his red armband so that it sat proudly on his arm. "We've been waiting for you." I wanted to tell him that I wasn't his general, but it didn't seem worth it. Besides, I couldn't deny that hearing those words, being called sir, sparked something in my gut, a rush of excitement. I'd been there before, standing in front of the warden back in the prison, dressed in another brand new black suit. It had been one of the only times in my life when I'd felt I'd really belonged, when I'd felt like I was part of something. It had been truly wonderful and truly awful at the same time. "I could have parked this thing a little closer to the beach," said Z, the water up past his waist. The black suit pulled him on board, doing the same for Lucy and Simon. The three of them squeezed together on the middle seat, shivering. The other two suits stood on the beach, watching us go. "They're not coming?" I asked, tasting salt on my tongue.
"Got reports that the army's heading this way," the black suit replied. "Furness has ordered all units to slow them down, to get you to the island."
"So where are they all?" Simon asked. "You need more than 2 guys if that psycho panettiere is coming after you." This time the black suit did scowl, using his massive arms to pull the starter cord. The engine came to life with a nasal whine, pumping thick black smoke into the air. I looked at the beach, at the cliffs, wondered if I'd ever see the mainland again, asking myself if I'd really miss it. With my parents gone, my old life all but forgotten, the only people who meant anything to me were on this boat. Z and Simon, Lucy too, I guess. They were what truly mattered. So long as they were with me, I didn't care where I was. And Donovan too, of course. When I closed my eyes, I could see him there, that blazing smile of his, bringing light and life back to the world. The black suit pressed the throttle, the boat accelerating out into the open ocean. I could have looked back, one last glimpse at the country where I'd spent every single second of my life. But I didn't. I stared ahead, waiting for the island to appear, the place where this would all end, one way or another. The black suit had been right. It didn't take us long to reach it. Z spotted it first, pointing his hand towards a dark smudge against the horizon. The ocean and the sky were almost the same colour, looking like 2 slabs of slate with the island trapped between them. It felt like we were travelling into a tomb. We sped closer, the boat bouncing on the rolling waves, the island like a tumour on the ocean. It seemed to grow and swell, its knotted black surface expanding until it dominated the skyline. It was just like in my dream, its cancerous cliffs of dark rock rising from the water like the walls of some ancient castle. And perched on top was that Gothic mansion, its bent turrets raised like broken fingers to the sky. There were shapes moving up there, peering over the edge and watching us approach. They were far too far away to make any sense of, but I'd seen these creatures in my dreams, the very worst of Furness's creations. He could see us too, Furness. I could feel his thoughts inside my head, a wordless welcome that made my ears ring. "Jesus," said Z, "it's huge." It was, and still growing, until it seemed so vast that it sucked the last of the light from the world, plunging us into dusk. The black suit steered us closer, heading down one side of the hulking behemoth. The cliffs here were even taller than those at the front, so sheer that when I gazed up at them they seemed to bend down over the water, ready to slam down on top of us like an executioner's blade. I had to look away, or risk spewing my guts over the side. "I didn't think there were any islands out here," Simon said, his face so pale it was almost green. "You kidding?" replied Z. "There are thousands. Most are too small to live on, but there are plenty like this one. I saw it on a documentary." He seemed to disappear into himself for a moment. Then his face brightened like he'd just had the best idea ever. "Hey, you think they'll ever make a documentary about us?" We laughed, quietly. I think we all knew that this one would be our last. The side of the island seemed to go on, an endless fortress of obsidian stone rising from the depths. I peered over the side of the boat, catching sight of the shapes beneath the surface, creatures that moved alongside us, their spidery limbs entwined in some horrific underwater ballet. One rose up, nudging a skeletal head against the hull, making us all lurch. I caught a glimpse of its face, like a corpse whose mouth was open in a permanent rictus of terror. Only bubbles emerged from its toothless maw, but I imagined that if I stuck my head beneath the waves, I'd hear it scream. I'd hear them all scream.
"Ignore them," said the black suit. "They won't hurt us, not unless Furness wants them to."
"What are they?" Simon asked.
"He calls them leviathans," the man answered. "Don't get too close, though, and don't look them in the eye. They take it as a sign of aggression. Believe me, you don't want to annoy one of these babies."
The creature beneath us vanished into the murky water, reappearing up ahead. One spindly, bone-thin arm rose up, 2 long fingers sweeping through the salt spray air as if beckoning us on. I could see the end of the island up ahead, and the black suit throttled down, the boat slowing. The cliffs here sloped right to sea level, but there were man-made stone walls in their place, slick with algae, cannons mounted on top. It's an old naval outpost, Z said, from centuries ago, right? From the wars.
This used to be one of the main shipping lanes in and out of the country, the black suit said, nodding. Not anymore, though. Nobody comes out here now, not since Furness bought the island.
There was a massive archway in the walls, and the black suit piloted us through it into a small stone dock. He steered the boat with practised familiarity to the low mooring, throwing a rope around the rusted metal cleat. We bobbed lazily up and down, the sound of wood scraping against stone seemingly the loudest thing in the world. Every time we rose, I could see the narrow path that led from the dock up through the fractured cliffs, the black stone carved by the elements into snaking towers, like we were in some ancient cathedral. There were shadows moving there, fluttering between the pillars, a constellation of silver eyes lighting up the gloom. A cry rose up, as forlorn as it was terrifying, and I wasn't sure whether the flurry of calls that followed was an echo or a chorus. Either way, it made me wish we'd stayed on the beach.
"Any time you like,"
said the black suit, waiting expectantly. "You're not coming?" I asked. He shook his head, and I thought I could see the emotion coiling in the molten silver of his eyes. He was scared.
"We're not allowed on the island," he said. None of the black suits are. This place is only for Furness and his pets."
He looked at me, at all of us.
"And now you."
"Great," I muttered. I grabbed the cleat with my left hand, struggling up onto the stone. The moment I set foot on it, a wave crashed against the rocks outside the bay, seeming to rock the entire island, the explosion deafening. I don't know why, but the sound made me think of a coffin nail being hammered in. I reached out and grabbed Lucy's hand, hauling her up, doing the same with Simon and then Z.
"Good luck,"
the black suit said, wasting no time in revving the engine and steering the boat out through the archway. He didn't look back. For a moment, the 4 of us stood and stared at the ocean, visible through the gap, at the distant horizon. I could feel the island behind me, its vast bulk like some hideous spider, waiting to sink its venom into us. I didn't want to turn around. I wanted to throw myself back into the water, swim for shore. But I couldn't. Not with those things out there, the leviathans, the thought of their witches' fingers wrapping around me, pulling me into the depths. No. We were trapped. There was only one way for us to go. I turned, looking up at the path that snaked towards the top of the island. Then I started walking, speaking as I went. "Let's do this. But not today." I said that, not Alex. Okay, I'm off on my quest to find a pet goat. We haven't really got big enough space for a pet goat, but if I had an island like Furness, I would have so many pet goats. So why doesn't Furness have pet goats? Well, maybe he does, actually. We don't know that yet. So join me tomorrow for more execution, possibly some pet goats on Furness's island. That would be an interesting twist. Maybe he's just got like a little small holding up there. He's got a few chickens, a couple of goats. Maybe he just wants someone to help him out on the farm. We will find out tomorrow. I hope you have a lovely day, whatever you're doing. And yeah, I will see you tomorrow. Bye.